So you've conducted your survey and you already have your data. You already have your table, you already have your statistics table. And now you have to write your paragraph and you don't know what to do. You're watching this video because you want an answer to that question. Stay tuned and we'll answer that. Hello everybody, this is Sir Joe and today we'll talk about how to write your paragraph for your thesis tables. If you're new to this channel, I'm also new to this channel, but I'm planning to make thesis crash course bits by bits on this channel. So if you want to learn more about thesis, subscribe to this channel and we'll talk more about that. To better understand how to write your paragraphs, first let's look at how a typical table would look like. First, you have your factor here, and then your mean, your standard deviation, and also your verbal interpretation. This is how a typical table would look like. For example, you have your factors A, B, and C here, and then you have your mean here. Let's say you have a Likert scale of 1 to 4, so your mean will be on 3.21, 3.45, and 2.78. And then your standard deviations, for example, are 0.67, 0.58, 0.43. Your verbal interpretations would usually be very high, low, or let's say high on this part. Remember that you are already on the second to the last chapter of your thesis. And if you could recall, depending on your school, it would either be chapter 2 or chapter 4. But it has the same titles. It's what you call presentation, analysis, and interpretation of data. Basically, you have to present, analyze, and interpret your data. How do you present your data? First, you state your table title. If your table is table 1, you say table 1 is the level of whatever it is about your respondents. And then that will be your first sentence. And then after stating your table title, you now proceed to the highlights of your table. So what are your highlights? Number 1, what are your common scores? You can also write what is your highest score. And you could also write your lowest score. And you can even write other relevant information here. Say for example, you have the high score, then you go back to your tables here. Basing on this sample mean here, we could say that the factor with the highest score is factor B, with a mean of 3.45 and a standard deviation of 0.58, with a verbal interpretation of low in this case. Remember, these are just sample tables. Then you proceed to the lowest score. The lowest score on this mock table is factor C. So we can say the factor with the lowest score is factor C with a mean of 2.78, a standard deviation of 0.43, and a verbal interpretation of high. Again, remember, these are just mock tables, just to deliver to you how you should write your paragraphs. And then you include other relevant informations. So usually I would encourage my students to write those that have very high and very low interpretation. So you need to write that down. Why? Because they had very high interpretation for a certain reason. So it is worth mentioning on your presentation. The next thing that we need to do is analysis. Analysis is putting meaning or implication. It's putting meaning or implication to what your table has. So what are the important information that you need to provide meaning on? If you could recall the highlights on your presentation part, whatever you have highlighted, you would need to provide meaning or implication. And the question would be, where get those meanings? Remember, you have your RRL or your review of related literature. And your literature has explanations for each of the factors that you have. you have to go back to those things. You have to explain the highlighted items, whether what it means to have very high or very low interpretation on those parts based on your literature. So analysis will come from your literature. The next part is interpretation. Interpretation requires that you would analyze your results, whether it is in line or in contrast. To what? Of course, to previous studies. To previous studies that you have included in your review of related literature. And the common question that I would get on this part is, what if they don't have any study related to that result? And that would be a problem. So what do you need to do? You would need to look for studies. You would need to look for previous research in relation to that. Because what you actually have to do with your review of related literature is to find results on those factors, on those things that you are looking into in your studies. Because most likely, there has already been other studies that have been doing that, especially in other cultures, or the Western culture, in other countries. You can always look for that. If you don't have that, then you have to look for that, because you need that for your interpretation. Now, there's one more thing that I'd like to add for this part, and that's what we call the plus. What do we do with the plus? The plus basically are explanations coming from your respondents. What do we do with your respondents? There are two things that we can do. One is FGD. The other one is KII. FGD stands for Focus Group Discussion. Now you have to be very careful with this. If you use this process, that means that you have one group from your respondents, and then in that group, in that focus group discussion, you will have to show them their results, whatever is high, whatever is low, whatever is the highest, whatever is the lowest, whatever is very high or very low, and ask them the question, what do you think is the explanation for having these factors as very high or very low? And then you get those explanations. But then again, remember, they have to be in a group. And usually that is very difficult. That is why I would go for KII. And KII stands for Key Informant Interview. What do we mean by Key Informant Interview? Key Informant Interview is when you ask important respondents or significant respondents from your pool of respondents. Those that you would know who can answer your questions properly or who can give relevant information about the results found on your table. And then you collect information from them about what they can say, how they can explain the results that you can find on your table. With that, you'll have the plus. The beauty of having this kind of explanations on your paragraph, having it presented, analyzed, and interpreted with a plus regarding your respondents' interpretation of their results, is that you are giving justice to your data. Because if you notice, you have your data here. And then you present your data and whatever the highlights are, and those highlights you interpret it based on your literature, and then you interpret it based on your studies. Whether it is in line or in contrast with the studies, you again interpret it based on another literature, and then you ask respondents about those highlights, about how they are being interpreted by the literature, and how they fare with previous studies coming from your respondents. So basically, you have a triangulation of explanation for your results for the paragraphs in this chapter. Again, this is presentation, analysis, and interpretation of your data. So there you have it. You can now write your paragraphs for your tables. And if you would want to know about what to do with your summary of findings, conclusion, and recommendations, I suggest you click and subscribe. We will talk about those things later on. If there are other things that you would want to know about thesis, please drop your comments below and I'll make videos about that if I could see that most of your comments are talking about that. This has been the first series of the Thesis Crash Course bits by bits. This has been Sergio. See you next time on another series of Thesis Crash Course.